I should write a book about my paramedic days. I posted this in a different forum and got quite a response. I thought I'd share it here. Retired paramedics are here. I had a call on a very desolate stretch of road for a car sitting in the middle of the road, covered in blood. We arrive on scene and find a new Camaro sitting in the middle of the road that had obviously been in an accident. The problem is that there is absolutely nothing else around the car. No people, no other vehicles, nothing. Part of my job then was as a tactical paramedic for our sheriff's department. Sounds all exciting and high-speed low drag. Nope, not as a medic. I got paid to wait for stuff to happen and sit in the rear with the gear. This being said, my paramedic partner and I both had pistols in the ambulance. As we start approaching the Camaro, my partner is shining a light around when he says, really low, hushed and rushed, back, now. He says, I shined my light in the car and there are intestines wrapped around the gear shifter and a lung in the back seat. So we kind of freak out, call dispatch, let them know what's happening, and we are in the process of getting out of there until the cops show up when we see a figure appear walking down the road towards us. As he gets closer, we see he is covered in blood and gore. We both throw on our tactical vests and helmets and snatch our pistols as I sound like a frightened 9-year-old on the radio to dispatch. We approach and start screaming at him to get on the ground, which he does. After everyone's heart rate is below 200 beats per minute, we start talking and figure out what happened. This guy had purchased a brand new Camaro and drove it to this desolate stretch of road to open it up. He said 1 minute he was shifting gears, and the next thing he knew, his car was all over the road. His mouth was full of blood, and it seemed like an explosion had gone off. I start looking his injuries over and can't really see anything major, so I ask him about the passenger in his car. He says, "What passenger?" My partner says. "There's a lung in your backseat." Dude goes straight into mental overload and can't come up with anything. So I'm thinking he's hurt. Get him in the ambulance. Police are 5 minutes away. We potentially have another victim out there. I have to go look by myself. I walk through the crash scene, look in the car, and sure enough, intestines wrapped around the gear shifter and a lung in the back seat. Look like parts of a liver. It looks like a hand grenade went off inside the car. I walk around the other side of the car and see a faint blood smear or stain on the road. I walk to it. I see something else further down the road, so I keep walking towards it. I finally see something on the side of the road and run up to it. I was honestly completely freaked out and scared to death about the body I was about to see. And the dude had hit a deer. What happened was that when he was winding the car out, the state police estimated him at well over 100th when a deer jumped into his path and hit the top corner of the windshield with its stomach. When the windshield crashed, it created a negative vacuum in the car, sucking almost all of the deer's organs out and into his car and all over him. I had the fire department decontaminate him, wrap him in some blankets, and take him to the hospital. For many, many years after, my wonderful 911 dispatchers happily played the recording for anyone who wished to hear it. I was hiding from your mom. My mom is dead. One of the creepiest stories I know personally is from my best friend when he was home at his house, babysitting a friend's kid. The kid, whose name was Junior, was roughly 4 or 5, I want to say. His dad was a courier, so he would often be doing deliveries late at night. David, my best friend, was a teen by this point, so being home without an adult was no great task. It's important to mention that his father was a pretty paranoid individual who bought into a lot of fear-mongering in the world, so he had cameras set up all over the place. I want to say this happened in 2014. Anyway, David was busy in his bedroom and was minding his own business, but then decided to head into his den, where all the cameras happened to be set up. But the den was locked. David knocked on the door to the den, and Junior opened it up. "Why did you lock the door?" David said. "Because of the lady," Junior said. "What lady?" David asked. "Your mom. I saw her in the kitchen. The house's living room was directly connected to the kitchen, and if you were standing in the kitchen entryway, you could see the door leading outside. It was one of those screened-in sitting areas. Junior claimed that David's mother was right there in the doorway. Really strange, especially considering David's mother had passed away just about 8 months prior. David was chilled by the remark, but the skeptic in him knew it was likely just Junior's overly active imagination, so he agreed to go and check with him. He brought a kitchen knife, if I'm remembering the story correctly. He walked with Junior down the hallway into the kitchen, where the door was open. The door being open was pretty normal. It was a hot summer day, and the house trapped a lot of heat. David stepped out onto the screen sitting area and looked left down the ramp his mother used to use to get outside. Nothing. He looked to the right, seeing the length of the yard, but nothing. Junior was insistent that there was someone there, which is strange, considering usually in situations like these, kids tend to feel better after you poke around for them. David couldn't calm him down. Junior was certain. He kept saying, "I saw your mom. She was here." So David bargained with him. Everything's recorded on the cameras, so we'll just look at them, and we'll know for certain whether someone was there or not. So they sifted through the cameras, and David looked for a timestamp around when Junior claimed that his deceased mother had shown up. He stared down at all the cameras as the timer ticked on and nothing showed up. But suddenly, he watched as the camera showed a figure enter his backyard from the front by pulling the latch. An old woman, at least in her mid-60s, confidently walked into their backyard. She had a cloth grocery bag in her hand. She headed up the ramp, and she stood in their screened sitting area for a few moments. She then reached for the door to the kitchen, cracking it open, and then brazenly stepped inside. After some time, Junior saw her in the kitchen and headed to David to tell him. Based on the camera's timestamps, she stood in the kitchen for at least 10 minutes. The absolutely insane part is that she left as David went to investigate with Junior. The camera footage showed him looking around and her leaving as he looked around. When he looked left down at the ramp where she'd come up, she'd already wrapped around and actually taken the long way around through the length of the yard. When he looked right, he quite literally just missed her. It was genuinely a matter of maybe a half second. Someone wandered right into his backyard and right into his kitchen, then stood there for 10 minutes in his kitchen, doing God knows what. Nothing was stolen, nobody was harmed or anything. Well, anyway, the night went on, and nothing came of it. Personally, I would have called the police. But David wouldn't. I think there's a chance that his dad may have had some guns that were acquired through, perhaps some non-reputable methods. They were locked away from everyone, whatever small comfort that is. Haha. So David's instinct was that his dad would likely be furious about the police being called. Well, anyway, some time passed. Days, weeks. Who knows? I'm not even sure how this information came about. But somehow, David was told by either a family member or a staff member that the old woman who wandered into the house had dementia, had an episode, and just sort of found herself there by a string of coincidences. How was my father in 2 places at once? First off, a little backstory on my dad. The man has so much character and color in him. Though he is mostly a chilled-out grandpa at this point, whose biggest offenses are the likes of placing a box of dead kittens in the topic had when the family plays charades at the Christmas Eve get-together. When I was a kid, he was a crazy person. He was an amazing father, honest to a fault, and had a character made of stone. He apologized when he felt he was wrong, and he would sit and cry with you when things were eating away at your self-esteem. However, as much as I owe him my morality and compassion towards others, I also owe him my extremely demented and nothing is sacred sense of humor. The man got more joy from life by tormenting his children than anything else. We lived on my grandmother's farm in rural Tennessee, and when the power would go out, which happened a lot in our area, he would dare me to run to the mailbox. and then lock me outside at 10 o'clock at night when I'm about 10 years old, and he would laugh so hard I could hear him over my screams while I banged on the door from the outside, pleading to be let back in. He was the type of dad to wake you up in the morning by revving a chainsaw, change the clocks in the house to make you get ready for school at 2 a.m., and stand on the front porch in his tidy whities while you were getting on the bus in the morning and yell, "I love you. I'm gonna miss you so bad," in a voice that could only imply that he was suffering from severe brain damage. In other words, he was always looking for a way to scare you, embarrass you, or just make you have such a crazy, unexpected experience that you would be guaranteed to remember him forever. And it worked. I loved that man. Now, that was needed for context, and this story takes place in my second to last year on my grandmother's farm. I was 17 and had been working a job in my small town, stocking beer coolers and mopping floors at the local gas station. I was driving home from work in my little truck at about 10 p.m., and as I pulled into the driveway, my headlights showed up the hill to my grandmother's house and panned down the hill to the edge of our single, wide mobile home. I stopped immediately, with all four tires in the driveway pointing straight to the end of that straight stretch of gravel. I could see my dad. His old flatbed truck and my stepmother's minivan were parked pointing to the left. At the base of our trailer, he was standing behind them with his back to my headlights. Our chocolate lab, Cassie, sat at his feet, staring intently at him, paying no attention to the vehicle entering her territory, which was highly unlike her. I only stopped because it was so late and so unusual for my dad to be outside at this time. It was in the middle of the week. He was usually passed out in his recliner, wearing nothing but his underwear, with the History Channel quietly rambling on about the Civil War by this time. I slowly proceeded down the drive. Our driveway was about half a football field in length, and as I drove slowly toward the bottom of the drive, my dad began to walk, still with his back turned to me, and stepped behind the vehicles, the height of my stepmother's van fully concealing him. It took another 15 seconds from that point for me to reach the end of the drive, and I pulled my truck in on the side of his flatbed, leaving me closest to the road. I grabbed my big gulp and got out of the truck. "Dad?" No response. "Dad?" Still nothing. Immediately, I got a bit creeped out, but then I thought to myself nearly as quickly, this dude is trying to scare me again. He must think I didn't see him. I got down on my knees and peered under the vehicles. His left boot, unmistakable. Cassie's back legs and butt right beside him, tail tucked between her legs. I hollered out, "You're doing a crappy job of hiding, Dad. I can see your boot sticking out from behind the tire on the van." I watched as his left boot slowly slid to the right until it was concealed behind the tire with the other. Still no response. I called for the dog, Cassie. She turned and literally scurried beneath the vehicles to get to me, as if she were under heavy gunfire. She was whimpering when she got to me and acting very strangely, as if she were terrified. She was acting how I would imagine a dog would act if they were constantly beat on, and I had never seen her behave that way before. When she got to me and I placed my hand on her, you could almost hear her breathe a sigh of relief. She was sticking to my legs like glue, and as I was still down on one knee and a bit off balance, she nearly knocked me over. I petted her for a moment and tried to comfort her, but she seemed like she was afraid of something. With her tail still tucked between her legs, she pushed herself in between my legs as I stood up. It was after seeing how timid and odd Cassie was acting that I decided that I may be misreading the situation and that I might need to get into the house. My dad was surely a prankster, but when he was caught, he was caught. He never drug things out once we caught on. He would come out and say something like, "I guess you kids ain't as gullible as you used to be. I'm going to have to start stepping it up a notch." Dad didn't drink much and never really got drunk, but I couldn't think of what the root of this odd behavior could possibly be, and it really started to freak me out. I made one last attempt at communication. "Dad, I know you're there. I saw you when I pulled into the driveway. The jig is up. What you doing out here?" No response. I started around the front of my truck to round up the vehicles and walk over to him. Cassie began to panic and whimper loudly, still glued to the inside of my ankles, crouched against the gravel with her head darting back and forth wildly. I stopped in front of my truck. I stand there for another moment in silence, waiting for something but not sure what, and then announce, "Well, I'm heading in. See you in a bit, weirdo." I turn to walk to the front porch, unconsciously building speed as I hit the first step. Cassie drops back and doesn't follow me onto the porch, but seems to sort of stand guard at the foot of the steps. Keys in hand, I'm already searching for the deadbolt key. Panic is building in my chest, but I'm not sure why. I hurriedly unlock the door and jump into the house, swing around and slam the door behind me, locking the deadbolt all in one fluid motion. From behind me, I hear a voice yell, "What the hell?" I spin around. My big gulp drops to the floor and explodes across the living room floor. There sits my dad, in his underwear, sitting up from a deep sleep in his recliner. I begin to hyperventilate and yell through gasps of air that there is a man in the driveway hiding behind the van. "I thought he was you. I was talking to him, Dad." I nearly collapse to the floor. Within 15 seconds, my dad is running out the back door of the house with a spotlight and a handgun, still wearing nothing but his underwear. He was outside for what felt like forever. When he came in, he was pale as a sheet. He said someone was definitely out there, but he couldn't see them. He could hear them running, but when he pointed the spotlight in the direction of the footsteps, there was no one there. The crazy thing is, our trailer sat at the front of a 150-acre cornfield, and it was off-season, so everything was tilled down to the dirt. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. It was a terrifying experience, and I know it's one that seems easy to explain. My brain really wants to tell me that I have just foiled a car thief or something, or maybe even stopped a possible home invasion. The thing is, though, that my dad has an unmistakable posture and an even more unmistakable walk. I know those were his boots I saw under the van. I also know that if he had somehow set all this up, I would have heard about it for years, because it would have been one of his favorite stories to tell. How he scared me so badly when I was 17, and how funny it would have been. He does tell people about this from time to time, but he always ends with the same detail. It wasn't until he was outside, running around in his underwear with a handgun, that I realized that Cassie had been sleeping on the floor next to his recliner when I ran in the door.